Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where we'd like to remind you that the best time to ever be alive is likely right now. At least so far. Nearly every major field of human endeavor has made significant advances over the millennia, and we haven't yet crossed over that point where humanity is locked into an inevitable death spiral. So hang in there and enjoy this week's episode with us. We're glad to have you along for the ride. Punishing criminals has a long and colorful history. For most of that time, long-term imprisonment as punishment was rare. Breaking the law had more immediate and long-lasting effects. Serious criminal violations, until very recently, usually earned a death sentence. Societies in the past didn't understand the concept of human rights, but they did have a solution for repeat offenders. In a previous episode, we explained how elephants were used to execute prisoners. This time, we will explore the way in which cannons helped destroy the guilty. First, we need to briefly explore the history of cannons. Cylinders of Death. The first gunpowder weapons were crude precursors to the modern cannon. Despite this, they demonstrated a new efficiency in delivering death to an opposing army. The Chinese were the first civilization to master gunpowder. In the 12th century, they created the fire lance. It was a tube of gunpowder that fired a polearm weapon. Although fire lances were a necessary development, they aren't considered a true gun. In order to meet the definition of a gun, a device must use the explosive force of gunpowder to propel a projectile from a tube. By the second half of the 12th century, the fire lance was improved considerably and more closely resembled a modern gun. Hollow tubes of bamboo were filled with gunpowder. When it ignited, a metal projectile was forcefully ejected. The device was deadly but difficult to aim effectively. Incremental improvements in the materials used to make projectile weapons eventually resulted in creating the cannon. The earliest known use of cannons in a military engagement was in 1287. A Chinese commander reportedly used them in battle and was victorious because of it. The Mongols also used cannons in 1274 and 1281 when they attempted to invade Japan. That effort was not victorious. Cannons were a major improvement in technology. They could launch larger projectiles longer distances, and when they hit a target, the results were devastating. It didn't take Europe long to adopt this new technology. The earliest European references to cannons are found in writings from 1267. More specifically, Roger Bacon recorded them in his work Opus Majus. He was a well-known philosopher and Franciscan friar. At the request of the Pope, Roger Bacon recorded what he knew. Europeans soon took that knowledge and made it work in military conflicts. The cannon became a common sight on European battlefields by 1350, although it started making an appearance on the continent as early as 1338. By the 17th century, improvements in cannon technology improved their accuracy, range, and effectiveness. They were used by ground troops and naval vessels. English ships in the 1700s were equipped with cannons that weighed 3,400 pounds and fired a 32-pound heavy metal ball. These could penetrate over 3 feet of oak wood from 300 feet away. By the 1850s, the technology was again improved to increase range and destructive capability. Cannons used during the American Civil War could fire at a target 1.1 miles away. They made the naval weapons from 2 centuries earlier seem weak by comparison. Until the late 1800s, cannons were like muskets in principle. A projectile was shoved into the tube and fired. In the 1850s, rifling was added to the inside of the cannon. The ridges in the tube stabilized the projectile as it was pushed out. This increased its range and destructive ability. At close range, almost all projectile weapons are deadly. And as cannon technology made its way around the world, some cultures became convinced it was a great way to kill criminals. It was also extremely gruesome. Blowing from a gun. When a cannon was used to execute a criminal, it was usually referred to as blowing from a gun. The condemned would be tied to the cannon, which was then fired. George Carter Stent was a British author and linguist during the 19th century. He witnessed prisoners being executed in this manner and gave the following account. The prisoner is generally tied to a gun with the upper part of the small of his back resting against the muzzle. When the gun is fired, his head is seen to go straight up into the air, some 40 or 50 feet. The arms fly off, right and left, high up in the air, and fall at perhaps 100 yards distance. The legs drop to the ground beneath the muzzle of the gun, and the body is literally blown away altogether, not a vestige being seen. Most accounts of cannons being used to execute prisoners were from the British occupation of India, but the method existed in other places long before that. Portuguese colonists used cannons to execute prisoners as early as 1509. The Mughal Empire, which occupied parts of southern Asia from 1526 to 1857, also used cannons to kill criminals. Afghanistan also liked to use this method, as did Turkey from time to time. Afghanistan particularly enjoyed it, as they continued to use the blowing from a gun method until 1929. Those who witnessed criminals being executed by a cannon were usually amazed and horrified. The victim's anxious anticipation of the fatal shot was uncomfortable to watch, and when the projectile pushed into the body of the condemned, it caused flesh and bone to suddenly explode into pieces. Usually, this method of death was selected to deter other potential violators. Assassins, political rivals, and revolutionaries made up most victims. Sometimes, soldiers who deserted also earned the experience. The British were perhaps the best at recording how cannons were used and why. Let's look more closely at how and why they used cannons to kill. The British solution. The British were very selective when using cannons to kill criminals. They only used the technique in India. This began in 1760 when the British government started examining military methods of punishment. They were in control of the Indian military. When it was time to punish Indian soldiers, the British thought using familiar techniques might be a good idea. The most common way Indian soldiers were killed, if convicted of a crime, was flogging. A prisoner was tied to a post and whipped repeatedly until finally dying from physical trauma. The British government was not in favor of this method. They were aware that blowing from a gun was a well-established punishment in the Mughal Empire. Compared to flogging, the British thought using a cannon would be more humane. It would also be more public and hopefully provide a greater public deterrent. Although the British government occupied India, most military activity in the region was in support of the British East India Company. The East India Company was able to function as its own sovereign power on behalf of the Crown. It did not need to ask for permission to order Indian soldiers into battle, and it didn't hesitate to kill them if they failed to obey. It also wasn't uncommon to execute large numbers of criminals at once. For example, in 1764, 25 soldiers were identified as the ringleaders for a revolt within the Indian ranks. They were all strapped in front of cannons and executed to demonstrate that mutiny would not be tolerated. Not following orders was also punishable by death. In 1775, the Indian soldier Mukhtum Sahib refused an order from East India mercenaries to travel to Mumbai. The men under Mukhtum were inspired by his resolve and followed his example. They also refused to go to Mumbai. The mercenaries killed Mukhtum by tying him to a cannon and blowing his body to pieces. His men became demoralized and left for Mumbai. Throughout the 1700s, there were numerous insurrections in the Indian ranks. The participants were all killed with cannons. On rare occasions, someone did get lucky, though. In 1784, a regiment rebelled because they had not been paid. 12 of the participants were ordered to be killed via blowing from a gun. The last of the 12 waited to die 3 times as the cannon fuse was lit, then went out. Finally, he asked the British commander if he was really destined to die in this manner. The British commander had mercy and pardoned the man. Cannons would reach their climax as a tool of execution during the Indian Rebellion of 1857. There was widespread unrest in India as its citizens rebelled against British rule. As the British captured enemy soldiers, they tried and executed them. Most were hanged. Many met their end in front of a cannon. A single journal entry records that at least 72 Indian soldiers were executed by being blown from a gun. Throughout the course of the British occupation of India, it's possible that thousands were ultimately killed this way. The last time the British used this method of execution was in 1871. Using a cannon to kill someone is usually effective. But sometimes it didn't work out as planned. Failure is an option. The British were so busy killing Indians in 1857 that sometimes they made mistakes. And when mistakes are made with destructive artillery weapons, it doesn't end well for anyone. When cannons were used to execute prisoners, the ammunition used wasn't configured the same way it would be during a military engagement. Most cannons from this era had a blank cartridge that would fit into the chamber. The cartridge would be loaded with pellets, otherwise known as grape shot. When the gun fired, it would launch the cartridge and the pellets. The pellets would then spread out. They would hit targets at high velocity and obliterate them. These weapons were the equivalent of a large and powerful shotgun. During a mass execution of Indian prisoners in 1857, the cannons were supposed to be loaded with a blank cartridge. A blank cartridge had sufficient velocity to kill a person. Without grape shot, it usually wouldn't hurt bystanders. Unfortunately, some of the cartridges were mistakenly loaded with grape shot. When the cannons were fired, many spectators were hit. Several needed to have limbs amputated as a result. Some nearby soldiers were also injured by flying pieces of bone and flesh from the spectators. In some cases, the prisoner wasn't tied to the cannon properly. A first-hand account of one such incident survives. One wretched fellow slipped from the rope by which he was tied to the guns just before the explosion, and his arm was nearly set on fire. While hanging in his agony under the gun, a sergeant applied a pistol to his head, and 3 times the cap snapped, the man each time wincing from the expected shot. At last a rifle was fired into the back of his head, and the blood poured out of the nose and mouth like water from a briskly handled pump. This was the most horrible sight of all. I have seen death in all its forms, but never anything equal to this man's end. Some of the local animals began to understand that when people were killed by a cannon, they were transformed into delicious food. Spectators of these executions commented that birds of prey would circle over the area waiting for the cannon to fire. As it blew the condemned to pieces, the birds would dive down and grab pieces of flesh from the air. Dogs also enjoyed the activity. Once the prisoner was converted to a dispersed mass of blood, bone, and flesh, the canines would move in and clean the area. Dogs might enjoy the company of people, but they sometimes like the taste as well. Ultimately, cannons failed to become an accepted method of execution. It was so gruesome that people who watched it commonly vomited. And when cannons failed to work properly, they went from a tool of destruction to one of psychological torture. Also, it was a costly method of execution. Cannons need to be maintained, ammunition and gunpowder are valuable resources, and it takes well-trained personnel to use the weapon effectively. What do you think about using cannons to execute criminals? Was it a good idea that we need to revisit? Or was it a ridiculous way to address crime? If you thought this episode was interesting, then please hit that like button and consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. Some of our episodes are really dark, and now we're empty inside. We need your meaningless validation. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History. Hey, if you stuck with us this long, please take a moment to reflect on something that lifts you up a little. We think you're pretty great.